Hi, and welcome to yet another episode of the New Space India podcast. Today we have Rajat here, who is the CEO of the Space Machines company. So, Rajat, you are here in India for the Bangalore Space Expo as a part of the 40-member Australian space delegation, which is, I guess, probably the largest ever for the BSX by any country so far. So, I hope that the week has been productive so far and you've been doing well and you've had good collaborations that are going on. So before we get into the details of what went well for you in this week, let's get a little bit of your own background and how you started the Space Machines company.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on the podcast. A bit of background: I grew up in Delhi. I did my high schooling in Delhi, and I moved to Australia to do university. I trained as an aerospace engineer. But in the late 90s and early 2000s, there were not really any space jobs around, at least in Australia. And so I spent about 17, 18 years in startups and software companies like Microsoft. Did still have my passion for space. So, I was part of a Google Express team out of Australia. It didn't last for too long, but, we made an effort. And so when we saw what was happening with SpaceX and the launch innovation that was happening in the last 7, 8 years, the spark came back to me. And my co-founder George and I, one day, we were having a conversation about, and the cliche is that I was watching Star Trek, and I saw in space manufacturing and assembly, and we said, hey, we should build a space factory of some sort, that spits out satellites. And very quickly we realized that to do anything in space, you got to be able to move around, you got to be mobile. And so when we looked around what logistics had done on Earth with roads and rails and aircrafts and ships. Our view is that space was going to follow the same paradigm. Step one is you lower the axis of long distance costs, which is what the launchers were doing, and then you create a hub and a spoke model. So you then have last mile connectivity that starts to reduce the cost of connecting the different points and different destinations. So that was sort of the birth of Space Machines Company. That was early 2019. And so we've been going since January 2019 officially. Yeah, and this week's been wonderful because with the delegation we got to see what India's been doing and how the ecosystem's matured. I still remember as a kid India going through the whole cryogenic acquisition process and how ISRO did an amazing job of building that sovereign capability over 15 years. And in Australia, we're just starting to do that. So I think there's a lot to be learned from India.
Right, right. So from what you're saying, I guess you stand with an advantage of being in two different countries, and getting the best of both of them before you probably started this venture in space. And I'm sure that your background in other other industries has helped you significantly as such. So. So you briefly touched upon what you want to do with the Space Machines company. So, but then what is the actual product or service that you are creating?
Sure. Look, when we looked at what kind of solution would be required to complement the first mile that the launchers were solving, we looked around for people providing those solutions, and we looked at different approaches in market. You had some companies looking at new forms of propulsion, in space propulsion, to power vehicles that would support that last mile connectivity. You had some companies looking at existing satellite dispensers and using them to enforce them to become OTVs, or orbital transfer vehicles, to do the last mile. We went back to the drawing board and we put a lens of customer. And when we started thinking about the customer, we thought about how does it work on the ground, and we looked at UPS and TNT and DHLs of the world, and what customers. The vision was the customers should not have to worry about which launcher. They shouldn't have to worry about how that launcher will get it to where it needs to go, and what backend infrastructure is required. All the customers really care about is that they have some certainty on how their satellite will be in the right orbit ready for them to start generating revenue. And for that, we then use that as a way to build our architecture. So, the key differentiators from our perspective, that our platform, which is called Optimus, is that we focus on multi-launch capability. So we want to support maximum number of launches out there. We focus on high energy missions, so we focus on high delta V. Optimus supports 3.5 kilometers per second delta V. So we want to really do those, high energy consuming missions, and we want to be able to support multiple geographies. And so, coming back to the Australia India partnership, I think there's a lot of focus in Europe for European companies. There's a lot of focus in US with regulations around ITAR and EAR and the rest of it. We found that it's a really interesting partnership between Australia and India, and almost a superpower in our view, where we could leverage that to provide our platform for these last mile services both into Europe and into the US.
Right. And what size of satellites and what kind of orbits are we talking about?
So the platform itself is about 300 kilos. We the first version of it, and we support up to 500 kilo in payload. And the 3.5 kilometers per second delta V that we set was around for a 200 kilo payload. So we want to support LEO to LEO transfers, so inclination plane changes, RAN plane, altitude raises from LEO to higher LEO orbits or LEO to MEO, but also eventually LEO to GEO transfers.
Right. And you started out in Australia, and I know actually very many bright number of Australians who've actually left the country before probably the space agency was born, and have pursued their careers. Even I think Enrico was in Virgin for like 15 years or so on, right? So
Yeah.
before coming to Australia. So what is the motivation of starting out in Australia? Was it because the timing was right when you started the Space Machines company, that you would get the kind of support that you need, or was that the primary motivation?
Look, absolutely. The timing was a critical factor. I think if we had started the company maybe a few years earlier, we would have probably not started in Australia. I think when we started the company, the agency was about a year old. There was a lot of enthusiasm and passion for building the space industry. A number of state and federal programs were coming online to support space companies and talent acquisition. And so I think it came down to timing. I think there's also an increased sense of space becoming a contested domain. So there's a lot of investments being made by government. And so I think with that interest, with also students and talent coming out of the university, there was a good supply of engineers wanting to do space. And so from my perspective, yes, absolutely timing.
So, given that you operate in both the countries now, India and in Australia, I'm sure that you have a reading of the places from both the standpoint of a space agency and a support, structure around the space agencies, as well as from availability of manpower or
Sure.
infrastructure and talent and all of these things, right? So can you give a reading into how would you compare the two countries, and where would you think that each country would probably can improve or from learn from each other, or what they do best in both places?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think with India, very long heritage, a very mature space industry. ISRO has done an amazing job of both R&D and launch part of things and building satellites, and I think they're starting to now understand how to promote commercial space and support the private industry that's emerging. So I think the challenge is going to be, I think there's been an inertia for very long on ISRO doing certain things and certain entities and organizations doing things, and the disruption that will come with new private entities, and how do you find that right balance of continuing to do what's been done whilst also supporting a burgeoning, emerging commercial ecosystem, both from a technology development, but also technology development, testing and qualification support, infrastructural support, and then policy and regulation. So I think that's a challenge. I think for Australia, it's flipped, where we don't have a lot of legacy, and so we have the luxury of seeing things that have not worked, and learning. In fact, I think it was really, really good to be at BSX and see the way projects around the country in India have applied certain things and learned from that, to our advantage, and not, in some cases, have learnings on what not to do and what to do. I think the challenges for Australia is building that baseline infrastructure to support a space industry, which India has. That's facilities, that's talent, that's a pipeline of people coming through who understand space and have worked on real missions. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges, and that's why I see there's a really good, I guess, harmony in some of our motivations to work together.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely in that sense, right? So when I see, I think a place like Australia, you also see like almost great talent and at the fundamental level, at the scientific level, I think it's very, very strong. But I think in India, you have a lot more like applied engineers, people who are technologists there. And I guess the science related, if you go hunt for, I don't know, chemists for propulsion, that would be difficult here in India versus, I guess, in Australia for that matter. Um, I recently saw that you guys inaugurated the Bangalore office. So congratulations on that. And firstly, what was the motivation of selecting Bangalore as a city? And secondly, what do you intend to do here in Bangalore?
No, thank you for that. Look, I think we Bangalore was a natural choice for us, given it's a home of ISRO and IST and a bunch of other space related. And within a very small perimeter, I think there's some great centers for technology development within Bangalore. And so I think that's why we chose Bangalore. I think we are at the moment doing a lot of our R&D, a lot of our early TRL 1 through to 6, and we're hoping to start doing with the MOU with the nanotechnologies. We want to start doing that sort of full TRL 1 to 8, in India. And so I think our ultimate vision is for the Indian office to become a commercial node for PSLV, SSLV, and GSLV customers. And very similar, we don't necessarily want our customers who want to fly on PSLV have to go to Australia and then come back to India for integration. We actually want to do the final integration of customers going on PSLV here. And so part of it is being able to supply vehicles that are ready to be integrated into those larger launch vehicles.
Yeah, I mean, I guess given that you have capacity coming up, probably also not just with the PSLV, but also SSLV, probably Skyroot, probably Agnicool, and so on. So that also gives, hopefully, if they are reliable, other options for you as well.
Absolutely. And look, I think we want to work with as many launches out there, because at the end of the day, it's about supporting all of the customers out there, right? The more launches we have, the bigger manifest we create across globally, the better services we can offer to customers.
So, what are your current timelines like? Obviously, what you are doing is really complicated. It's almost as if you are building a satellite that will deliver rockets. So that will deliver satellites, right? So it's a satellite that will deliver satellites into certain orbits at the end, and that should be definitely complicated at the end. So, what is the path forward to heritage? Is it a smaller OTV that demonstrates the baseline technology with some propulsion algorithms that are tested, and then throws some payloads, and then a bigger one, or how does it go?
Yeah. At the moment, we've got two missions manifested. First one is with Gilmore Space. They're building a hybrid rocket out of Australia. We've got a scaled model on their first flight, which is testing some of our structural and other subsystems as part of that, and some control and communications. We have a full scaled vehicle planned to fly on Transporter 8 in April of 23. So we're actually very busy building that vehicle, which is a full scale model. So it's going to be full capability. We're not carrying as much fuel, but in terms of the entirety of function, it's there. We have 5 customers on it, so we're flying a hyperspectral camera, a situational awareness package, onboard processing. We're testing some flexible solar panels on that flight, and so we've got a diversity and also a robotic arm. So we've got some really diverse customers on that first flight, and that's in April 23. And I think there's a subsequent flight planned for December and January of 24, December 23 and January 24.
Right. Yeah. I mean, good luck with all of these. I think it'll be really exciting to see all of these go ahead. So you were here at the Bangalore Space Expo, and it was a pretty busy week. I mean, can you briefly touch upon all the MOUs and all of the collaborations that you established? I know that there was quite a few of them, and what you see happening with all of them.
Yeah, look, I mean, we did an MOA with Anand Technologies, which is memorandum of an agreement, and that was really around collaborating with them and their flight heritage on how we start to build subsystems and missions together, primarily on Indian launch vehicles. So starting to set a baseline of that framework. I know there were some other companies around everything from onboard processing companies from Australia working with Indian companies to spaceport and launchers. Skyroot did an MOU. So I think it's a really diverse set of downstream and upstream applications across the MOU. And so yeah, so I think that's been really useful. I also think that it was really useful to be able to interact with InSpace and ISRO and NSIL and really understand the strategy they have. And it was great to see a lot of support and encouragement from InSpace and Dr. Goenka on the companies in Australia and India working together.
Yeah, on that point, you have seen significant favorable structures and mechanisms coming out of Australia that has supported your growth so far. Is there any pointers that you may want to give to the Indian policymakers, that can further give any you know catalysis to a lot of these companies here locally that you would then recommend they follow based on the Australian experience here?
Yeah, look, the at the end of the day, when you look at space or any sort of forward-looking technology, it's been, and especially if it's infrastructure, it's required a lot of leaning in from government, right? Promoting private companies to slowly get up and running because of just with the magnitude of capital investment that's required. A great example of that is back in the 80s you had DARPANET, and government leaning in on establishing the infrastructure for the internet. So I think, from my perspective, a robust grants program, so small companies can start to work on interesting problems and start to get those initial TRL levels. So be in a position to start demoing it and be able to access private capital, right? And complement their government, procurement slash grants programs with private capital. I think that's a really big part of it. The other thing I think which is really useful, and I think India is doing a lot of that as well, is tax incentives and various incentives on the corporate side that help space companies as part of the policy. One of the biggest costs for any space company is launch costs. So I think really starting to create mechanisms by which you can reduce the cost of getting heritage and flight heritage. And I think a couple of states in Australia have done a great job of starting to provide incentives for companies so they can get a cheaper access to space.
Right, and you are looking at a team here in Bangalore, and I know that Piyush is also probably looking at actively hiring people for the Bangalore office here. Uh, is there any reading of the kind of people that you are looking to hire on also the quality of them? Because at the end of the day, one of the key aspects of hiring, I guess, is quality, right? So, and the fit to the timing, and you don't want to invest in a lot of training of these people, and you want them to be get going on day one. So what is your reading of the talent available here in India? Is it on the get go they're ready to fire for you, or is there is there a starting period where you have to invest some significant amount of resources, either training them with your counterparts and their counterparts in Australia or so on, or are they pretty good enough to just get going from the day one?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. So, just as a background, we've got 10 engineers in the team in Bangalore already, and I think it's a mix. I think it's a mix of bringing in people that have a lot of space experience, which I think is we can find in India because there's been multiple missions and people with a lot of experience worked on space missions. I think for us the key thing though is um, culture, right? I think we focus a lot on culture. We want builders, people who are willing to be hands-on engineers, and so I think the transition from old space to new space has been about not so much knowledge acquisition, but more about how to build. And so I think some for some people it comes naturally because they're just builders. So I think where we've had to do some work has been around mixing talent so that we can get people who are really good at the technology areas to start to become builders. Because at the end of the day, I think once you can do the entire design, build, test loop, you feel empowered and you feel passionate. So I think for us, we're space machinists, we're practical, we're builders. That's the culture we think works and wins.
Right. So, what is the eventual team sizes are you are looking at in both Australia and India when you have the full service up?
Yeah, look, I think at the moment we're targeting 25 to 30 people in India, and a similar complement in Australia, and sort of focused in India, really focused on vertically integrating some of our technology, plus also supporting commercial operations, and in Australia, really looking at assembly and integration and testing.
Right. Yeah, that's really terrific. I hope that many more Australian companies, follow your path and look to, use also India as one of the destinations that they would take advantage of. I think it's pretty unique because I actually don't know any new space company that is operating in the model that the Space Machines company is operating at the moment.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think for me, Australian Indian values are very similar, right? For different reasons, engineers here and engineers in Australia and talent have gone through adversity, and so we think about innovation very similarly. So I think there is a big. We also think about moving fast, and so there's a lot of resonance in terms of the way we think about things and think about the world. And so I think not just our cultural values, but our technology values are very similar. So I think we made that decision very early on, and it has a lot to do with my background as well. So I think we hope that this is something that we can leverage globally as a superpower.
Right, and Australia has been significantly growing as a space economy, since the creation of the space agency, and I see a lot of interesting, infrastructure being funded, technology, development being funded, and so on. So, this is the time I think everybody is investing the money to create the foundations. But then, it takes time for these investments to then mature into having the foundation built to people to have, everything to then go on top of it, right? So where do you see the Australian ecosystem going from where it is today in about 3 to 5 years in time? Because that's a reasonable amount of time to say that people have either achieved flight heritage or they have the capacity to deliver some level of volume or so on. So I mean, in terms of let's say satellites, launchers, OTV missions, where do you see all of this going?
Yeah, great question again. I think Australia has had a natural I guess, tilt towards downstream applications. So I think that's going to continue to grow. I think communications, downstream application of space data, so space situational awareness, I think those areas will continue to grow exponentially. I think where I'm really hoping that in the next 3 to 5 years, I believe that we will have a sovereign capability launch vehicle. We're really looking forward to working with Gilmore on their first launch and consequent launches. We also think that there'll be more investments in upstream, upstream hardware. We believe that the OTV market is going to be, it's a great equalizer for Australia, where companies across both Europe and US are still trying to work out, get their performance and reliability in place, and so we're pretty on track. So I hope in the next 3 to 5 years, OTVs become something that Australia does super well.
So maybe one last final question before I let you go. What kind of people are you now still looking to hire in India? Because I guess for the audience, it may be something interesting because then I guess they may either apply to you guys or you may find some good people who are probably listening into this show.
Yeah. Well, okay. As far as areas, we're looking for structural, thermal, electrical engineers. We're looking for mission ops engineers. But I think besides all that, we're looking for really passionate builders. People who want to learn fast and learn new things. Because at the end of the day, once you have the passion, once you want to get hands on, you can pretty much learn anything. So I think more than anything, we're looking for what we call machinists, which are these you know builders who want to do great things. And so I think if you're electrical, mechanical, mechatronics, or orbital dynamics person, reach out to us.
So Raj, congratulations on getting this far, and then getting the timing right, getting so many things right, and then I have to again thank you almost on part of the new space community in India in having an R&D center here in Bangalore that also works with your office in and engineers in Australia. I think this will probably serve as an inspiration to probably a few others. And then I guess they will probably learn from this to leverage such presence in different countries to then build on this model in the space sector. So good luck with everything that you are doing with the space machines company, and I hope to catch up with you in a year or two to again probably record another podcast to see where things have gone and so on. So thank you so much for spending the time with me today and recording this.
Thank you so much for having me.